right.
Yeah, there's going to be a bit of a
There you go.
pause while my Adobe Connect quit, so.
Okay. Oh. Do you want me to hold off for a second or keep going?
Well.
I have no idea. I don't know how any of this works, so I'm at the mercy of everybody else telling me what's going on.
We have a plan B, so, yeah, I'm getting my Adobe Connect started, so, we'll cross our fingers, and if not, then we can go into plan B, which will be Brett's computer.
Sure.
And I'm gonna say...
It was very anticlimactic. Sorry for the
Yeah, that's
intro.
I'm all right.
All right, so are people seeing this lovely slide with, you know, a penny and an iTunes card?
I see it online,
Okay.
obviously.
Is everybody else out there in Adobe Connect land seeing it? Oh,
Yep,
yep.
Lisa's saying yes,
Alright.
Harry's saying yes.
Oh, good. All right, so I'm just gonna start the slideshow and turn it over to
Excellent.
Eric.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris, for the introduction a little bit ago. Like I said, my name is Eric Rochette. I am an instructor here at Penn State University Park in the anthropology department. And I guess we'll just talk a little bit about this game that I've been working with the EGC, Electronic Gaming Commons, to develop. That was really an attempt to try to move a game that I play in class to illustrate some concepts related to economic anthropology and economics and the way anthropologists approach that topic. And so I found the game very useful, and what I want to do here is first I'll just go through a little bit sort of how I set it up in class. Generally, these take place not in large lectures but in discussion sections, and then sort of go through sort of the process of how we converted this game, so you get an understanding of what sort of this is meant to do here. So, a little background: the original idea came out of a publication that was published in a series of books that's now actually all entirely free online. Prentice Hall, I think, now provides them all for free, or Pearson, I think, is who does it, called Strategies in Teaching Anthropology. And Kathy Small, who is now at Northern Arizona State University, had developed this game that she called the Penny Game. And it was intended to talk and to teach students and to sort of bring the idea of reciprocity to life in the way that we describe it and talk about it from a cross-cultural perspective. And basically what the game is attempted to relate to is ideas that we sometimes think about, especially in Western capitalist industrial societies, about what people do and what constitutes economic behavior and how people make economic decisions. Typically, you know, if you've ever taken a macro or microeconomics course, or ever talk about it, you think of things like some of these images that I put up here. You know, the stock market. Trump University apparently no longer exists. It's now the Trump Entrepreneur Initiative, whatever that means. And you can't even access any information. You have to be part of the Entrepreneur Initiative, and even to get past the front page now. But you know, think about ideas. You know, like first sort of harkening back to Adam Smith. People have unlimited wants but limited means to achieve those wants, like that image of you save $230.28. There's a whole show on Learning Channel now about extreme couponing. And so people think about these ideas about, you know, how, you know, economics is, how people approach, you know, meeting their needs and their wants. But when we look at, especially from the perspective of anthropology, when we look at the way people make decisions, we realize that they're not strictly rational in the sense of maximizing their gains or maximizing their profits. People do a whole host of things that, you know, bring in a whole host of other sort of ideas when they make economic decisions. So that, I don't know if you can see it on the upper left-hand corner there, lost iPod, $50 reward, call Carolyn. Somebody right next to it put lost iPod, $51 reward, call this other number. Rationally, you know, the person would, you know, you would think would call $51. You ask students, they say, no, you call the person with the $50 reward. Why? Well, because they're probably the one who put it up first. Could actually be the other way around, but you know, the assumption is that. Buy fresh, buy local. If you've ever bought fresh and bought local, you know it's not always cheaper. But there are certain ideas behind buying fresh and buying local that people are attuned to and that people value, and that aren't strictly economic in the sort of rational, limited means to achieve your wants. The upper right-hand corner picture is actually a whale meat distribution among Inuit, in which all of those little chunks of meat that you see are being given out equally to all of the members of the village. Not every person participated equally in the hunt for this whale, but because of the notions about how people in the village who are related to one another or have social relationships to one another need to be provided for, those ideas are there, and people can't necessarily hoard some of these things. And so we teach this in the idea of saying that while we may be used to things like market distribution in the way in which we get all of these things, there are other modes of distribution that people want to, other ways that people participate in exchanges in order to get and achieve, their ends. And there are all sorts of factors that people think about. And so really what this game is meant to talk about is something other than market exchange, talking about in particular the idea of reciprocity, and which for most people sort of encompasses gift giving. But really, if we look at societies in which the market is not the predominant place in which people meet their needs, we see that a lot of sort of exchange between people is in the form of reciprocal exchanges. And when we look at some of those reciprocal exchanges, we see that people tend to be more generous with people who are closer to them, a little bit less generous and more desirous of an immediate exchange when people are somewhat close to them but not outright strangers, and tend to try to get as much as they can while giving as little as they can when they are very distantly related to one another. And I always take this example when talking about this, and just a personal example. We've all had some experience similar to this for my 30th birthday, which was now, unfortunately, a few years ago. My friend Holly, Dr. Holly Dunsworth there, gave me a gift card to iTunes at my birthday party. I didn't ask for birthday gifts, but the question I always ask my students is, what do I owe her? And one of the questions they always give back to me is, well, how close a friend is she to you? Well, you should give her, maybe something that's nice or something, but some of them will answer, well, you should give her something that's worth $25 at least, or, well, just give her something that will mean something to her. What I ended up giving her with a friend who also received a $25 gift card for her birthday were Tom's shoes for a variety of reasons, not least of which is the fact that for every pair of shoes you buy from Tom's, they donate a pair of shoes to children in developing countries and in poor communities. And so, there are these whole host of decisions that people take into effect when exchanging things. But really, the whole point here is one of the things that is implied in that gift giving there is that the idea Inuit people would say that when the story here is recounted when forgetting the guy's name right now, was given a share of seal meat after a hunt, and he said, "Thank you." And he said, "No, you don't say thank you, because if you say thank you, that means somebody's given you something that you now owe them for." And so they said the quote that he was literally what was said to him was, "Gifts make slaves like whips make dogs." And the idea here is to start to get to people to think about how all of these types of obligations move on here. I'm going to skip this slide just in the interest of time because I want to sort of get to the game itself here. And so what we do, actually I'm going to go back to this slide in just a minute. What we've done in class to illustrate this is to try to get everybody to create a scenario, a hypothetical scenario in which everybody in the class is a member of a community. And we give out pennies. And for those of you in the room, this is what I have to bring to class every time I run this. And I have to separate out into these little baggies 10 pennies, which are here, and give them a little sheet where I ask them to record some information about their exchanges. But the way it works is everybody's given an equal amount of pennies, and then they're told that basically they have to trade blindly with one another, either 0 pennies, 1 penny, or 2 pennies. But they're not supposed to let their partner know how much they're trading. And what happens is, if you go up to someone and offer to make a trade with them, they can't refuse, which is how gifts work. You're not supposed to refuse a gift. And what happens is then you get engaged in that trade and you mark down whether or not you gave more pennies to that person than you received, and vice versa. And usually I set it up to something like 7 partners or a certain amount of time where you have to keep trading during that time period. And students basically engage in different strategies, maybe consciously or unconsciously. Some people sometimes are just generous naturally with these pennies. They don't necessarily see the point maybe right away. And that's part of the idea here, is sort of I keep this veil up a little bit to sort of not to get them to act however they want to act. But with the idea that as in many societies, people who have more things sometimes have a bit more prestige. That varies, obviously, because we're simplifying things from reality for the purpose of this game. But that they can't trade away their last penny, because their penny is a symbol of the things that they have to survive. In this case, we use the idea of a bunch of yams, because this game actually comes from Kathy Small's research in Tonga, where yams are a very large part of the diet. And so the idea is that you have to have at least one, but the more you have, somewhat more you'll be looked upon within society. And so we get them to go about trading these pennies. And after a while, what we do is stop it, and we see who has the most pennies and who has the least. And generally, you're going to have, I've yet to ever have this be a situation where you don't have somebody who's a hoarder in some sense, somebody who is consistently giving out 0 or 1 pennies to people, and who ends up with, they start out with 10 pennies, ends up with 20 or something like that. And occasionally there's a few people that end up with just 1 penny. And most of the class tends to fall within the distribution somewhere between 7 and 13 pennies, let's say, just from experience. And so you have this, this sort of natural distribution in some sense that's reflective of a whole host of decisions that people are making constantly as they're trading these pennies. And so we discussed sort of why, how people who did well in some sense, how they engaged in these trades and how that benefited them. And then what we do is say, well, guess what? We just had a disaster. And randomly, as disasters often do, they affect some people more harshly than others. And I basically go around the room and randomly count off every third person and take all of their pennies. And now what the notion is, though, with reciprocity is that reciprocity imposes an obligation to reciprocate. And we've already talked about this more in class beforehand, and we've talked about here in this brown bag. But the idea is if you gave somebody more pennies before, you can then go to them and have them reciprocate those amount of pennies because you have a relationship with them. In that sense, they owe a debt to you. In the other sense, that even people with whom you had an even exchange, you can also collect that same amount from them and ask that of them. And generally, what we know from ethnography and from people, from studies of a variety of different societies where reciprocity forms a large part of exchange, people will give you something in return because they know you were fair with them before and that you'll get them back when you get back on your feet. And then what we see is what actually happens at that point. How has the sort of ranking in the class changed? Because inevitably some of those people that were hoarders early on don't do very well after this, or some of them that may have been affected and don't have any relationships that they can call upon to sort of enhance and to bring them back into a comfortable lifestyle in some sense. And what this leads to is a discussion to start to understand why in certain cases, in this case, why under certain circumstances, reciprocity and giving things away is a logical and economically rational behavior, and how we can explain that by contextualizing that within the types of societies we look at and the way people are related to one another in any particular way. And so I've used this game for probably the last 5 years or so after coming across it in Kathy Small's article. And it works really well because students love it because now you're not just lecturing or just having a discussion where they're just sitting down and some people can dominate the discussion, some people who are more perhaps timid about speaking up in class won't participate. But everybody gets up, everybody gets to move around, they get to joke around with one another, that guy's screwing me, or that person is, go to that person, they're giving stuff away. And so they get to engage with one another in ways that they don't always do in some of these discussion sections. I'm sure if you've ever taught a class, you're familiar with some of that, the difficulties with getting students to participate. And it gets them to sort of not only to be able to think about some of these ideas of reciprocity, but also to get an idea about in which, in this case, by creating this fictitious situation, how they can actually think about these things. And from my experience, when you ask them, later on in another assessment, a quiz or an exam about reciprocity, I've had a lot of students who will refer back to that game and will accurately answer the question, but will refer to the game. Well, I remember, during the game in class, we engaged in some of these activities, and balanced reciprocity happens, yada yada yada. So it's something that allows students to also retain this information in ways that sort of just some of the other methods might not. And what's happening right now is part department is moving towards hybrid courses for especially our large introductory cultural anthropology course. And so one of the things that I've been working on has been developing online discussion sections, which will supplement the twice-a-week lectures that students meet. And our intro cultural anthropology course has usually somewhere between 280 to 180 students a semester. During the summers, obviously, it's a lot smaller, but it fulfills general education, non-Western society, all those types of requirements. And so we get a lot of students who are taking this who aren't anthropology majors, let's put it that way. And so one of the things, because it's so big and because of all the budget cuts and all the sort of budget constraints that we have, one of the things that we're moving to is trying to move these discussion sections online. And because that game was so successful in helping students to remember some of this stuff, I wanted to try to find a way to recreate that game in the context of these online discussion sections. And I saw the call for I forget what the exact title of the grant, the call for proposals for developing a game with the EGC last year. And I put together a proposal that was primitive, to say the least, in comparison to how, which you'll see in a moment, how the game looks now. I literally had the idea that, I actually just created a PowerPoint slide that had a table that said avatar here, number exchanged here, rank here. And I had no concept of how this would be visualized, how this would work. I had no experience with this whatsoever. But as you'll see here, this is what we've come up with thanks to the diligent work of Brett and Elizabeth and Chris, Zach Zidek, Pat Bisong, who am I forgetting?
Wolf.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, Jason, there you go. So I guess I'll show it here. Well, I guess, does anybody have any questions about anything before we look at the game itself? So I think, is this going to work here, you think? Let's see. Should I maximize this then?
Yeah, it's not as, that,
Okay.
yeah, but, yeah, you can maximize it.
All right. Go to the green. Yep, there we go. Okay. So here's the game itself. This is what right now is just a single-player version. We are in the process of, I guess it's going to be done soon, working on what will be a multiplayer version where students will be able to interact with other students that are in their same discussion sections and playing this game with one another. This, however, right now is sort of the demo that just runs automatically. And so, as you can see, we decided to call it Bucket of Beans, a game of reciprocity. The idea being, instead of pennies, you're trading beans here, which is a fair substitute for the notion of what those pennies were supposed to represent anyway. Here are the little bucket that represents you. I don't think we have volume here. There's some island-themed music that we've used. But I guess I'll just log in here and we'll look at how we've tried to make this work in the context of basically asynchronous discussion sections. These discussion sections don't run for, I'll just do the name, I guess. These discussion sections don't run for a 50-minute time period or anything like that once a week. Students are able to log in or out of these discussion sections. And so we run this game and designed this game so...
Sorry.
All right. Yeah, you can hear a little bit of the pan flute music that goes with it. But, all right, so here's me logging in here, which is what a student would do even in the multiplayer version. And once you select once you get your name, which will, I think, automatically be populated when it's linked up with the student list, you then get to choose your bucket color. It's a simple way of maintaining a degree of of individuality for each person. Choose my daughter's favorite color, purple. And then click Continue. And what it takes you to is a screen, as you can see here, where at the lower, on the right hand of the screen right here, they can see the mouse, right?
Yeah,
moving.
they can
Okay.
see moving.
You see a number of beans here, plus a null symbol to note not giving beans. And you'll see on the right-hand side, you can see all of a sudden there's one player number 3 is highlighted as in red. And that means that in this case, this algorithm that's running has offered me a certain number of beans. And because they have done that, I'm going to go, I'll say, give this person 1.
You don't know what they're giving you.
Exactly. Just like in the game that we play in the classroom, you have no idea what they're giving you. So I've decided, all right, well, I'm only going to give them 1, And so I click complete. As you can see now, it's going with a few others. I'm actually going to be one of these hoarders here. As you can see, that once it's in yellow, that's a completed trade. There we go. I'm going to try to be really nasty to everybody here just for the sake of showing this here. And you can drag up to, I think we set it up to 3 beans on any one. But one thing that you'll notice is on the bottom part of the screen, you'll see these red and green arrows. And you see there's a limit to the numbers that you can initiate or to accept. And that's simply because of the idea that what's happening here is, you could get students that are basically trading infinitely, which wouldn't happen in a class because it's not, because of the constraints of time. Clicking here we go. All right, making sure. I'll complete these here. As you can see, one thing is there's a countdown running down. And that countdown is, let's go here. Go. Be mean to you two guys here. And so now I've already met my quota of trades. But what we're doing here is we've separated this into 2 rounds because this is an asynchronous class. Students are not going to be all logged in at the same time. And we also wanted to prevent them from sort of front-loading all of their trades. In other words, logging in at the very first day that this game opens and then trading dumping a bunch of trades out there and not really interacting in any sense, or just waiting until the very last minute and not trading enough in some sense. And so we divided it into 2 rounds so that they have to come back over the course of 2 days, and they start to see how their number of beans change, and who in the class is trading how well with you and not. And basically, just so that we keep them engaged for a longer period of time instead of just them coming in quickly and then leaving on any given day. As you can see right now, I have to wait 2 minutes and 18 seconds because right now it's just time for that. The normal rounds will just go 24. Over 24 hours will be the ticking clock here. Let's complete my trades. So you can see the different bucket colors here. They just have player names, say player 7. Those will be students' IDs. So mine would be ETR 109, or somebody else's will be their Penn State ID, because these are all students that will be in the same class. And because they're all part of the same section, they will already have been interacting with one another on previous discussion boards as part of this course. And so there'll already be some degree of familiarity with other students in the course, in the same way that they would be familiar with people that are in their course. I'm really being mean here. But for the sake of, as you'll see in a moment, showing you what's going on. But you see right here, there's also this thing that allows you to scroll down to the other people, because it's difficult to fit all of the people in the class in one row here. So there's a little scroll bar to let you scroll through everything. But now that I've completed all the trades that I can in that round, you'll see I can't trade any more. And this is just, again, to prevent people from essentially differentially having more or less beans because they've traded more often than other people, so that there's some sort of equality in that sense in terms of how many times people have traded in this particular game. For the purpose of this, I mean, I want them to know that this is not just a game where they're just interacting with a computer. This topic, talking about economics and intercultural anthropology, generally takes place somewhere around the 5th week or so of class, typically in the way that we usually sort of organize the schedule. And so at this point, they already know each other. And usually in class, in the actual discussion sections where they're face-to-face, they know who, a lot of them know each other already. And so, some of them may not, but that sort of sense of being able to actually speak your mind and being able to know people is something that I find is really important for establishing, obviously, in online learning, because otherwise, you get some of the anonymity of discussion boards, internet trolls, put it that way, people who just make anonymous comments. And so now here's the disaster. As you can see, Zach really outdid himself here. Actually, let's turn up the volume here a little. Where is it?
Up there.
Oh, there it is.
Unfortunately.
So you can see disaster, many beans feared lost. Hoarder says trading not for me. And so what happens is the same way that. Oh, there it is. Oh yeah, sorry. need to turn it all off now. And so this is what that disaster screen is what students would see when they log in on that third day of this particular activity. Now, during this time period, in between those, during those first 2 days when they're actually exchanging, one of the things that will be going on simultaneously on the discussion board in Angel is talking about how people were doing and why people were trading in certain ways that they were doing, in the same way that we would do in class in between these things. But now what you see is an animation that goes on just recounting for you, for the individual who's playing the game, with whom they traded, how many beans they traded. As you can see, I'm not giving any beans away here. In this fictional classroom, I'm ranked number 1 after the first round. Probably going to be ranked, I had 50-something after the second round, probably going to be ranked pretty highly. And so it goes through this screen for a little bit. Obviously, it runs a little bit faster. That's running pretty much on screen. I guess it's just seeing the delay on Adobe Connect here. And so it just it recaps you because you're logging in here after the third day of what went on. And get to a second here. Almost done, right? Yeah, there we go. I was really being mean here. All right, so then here comes the disaster. As you can see, there's a little information on the bottom. Then disaster occurred. The disaster wiped out 6 players. Fortunately, you are not one of them. So I got lucky here. One of the things that, I'll explain this here. After the disaster, reciprocity takes place. So again, the idea that you can go back and call on those reciprocal obligations that people have to you and be, in some sense, have that relationship continued in people based on how they were doing will reciprocate to you and what they owe you. And so here's what is not the final way that the leaderboard is going to look, but here it gives you a recap of sort of that ranking that I had talked about earlier. It might be a little hard to see up on the screen here. What you have is this, this first round scoreboard, the number of beans you had after the first round in your rank, the number of beans you had in the second round in your rank. And you can see that if I sort it here, you can actually sort these columns in any way that you want. You can do them by round 2. You can do them during the disaster. If I click on this one here, you can see how many people, let's do it the other way around. Okay, it only does it one way. But it goes all the way down to you see people having 0 beans at the bottom here. And then what happens after reciprocity has taken place. Now, if I click on this one of the things you'll notice is some of the people that had 0 beans are now still, who were previously, in this case, this person, if we look at this example, player number 16 here, had after the second round of trading, had only 8 beans left and was 14th in this, in this ranking system, which isn't necessarily the point, but gives students an idea about how, because this person was wiped out, they actually end up doing better off in some sense, have a higher standard of living later when they have after the disaster because they were able to call on social obligations. And that in this sense, giving things away for that person, maybe doesn't seem sort of logical in the first sense, but that giving it away does, in that sense, create a form of sort of social banking, if you will, that you can then rely on later. And this is especially something that we discuss later on in terms of societies in which maybe storage might not be able to sort of meet all of your long-term needs. This is especially true in places, yams, for example, and this is the societies in Tonga and Papua New Guinea where we really see reciprocity sort of studied classically as a very key or essential element of how people meet their needs. Yams don't store very well, especially in tropical environments, for very long, and so by keeping them, by hoarding them, you're not going to do yourself any good. So it makes sense to trade with people to create these ties that are long-lasting often in order to be able to meet your needs later on.
I have a question. Even though you were pretty much a greedy person, the social obligations sort of forced you to give some away? Exactly.
And this is another thing that we talk about, and this is something that actually makes this game a little bit better than the in-class exercise. Because one of the difficulties in class is you know, I could ask students to tally all this up, but because we only have 50 minutes, you know, and I've already, you know, had to sort of go back and, you know, remind them about what reciprocity is, and then set up the game itself, it's not always easy to do all of this retallying of, you know, having people say, okay, now go to all these other people and, you know, call back your obligations. And so it's kind of difficult to do that, but because in this game it automatically is tallied, you get to see how somebody as greedy as I was who had 52, you know, I'm less well off. I'm still, you know, in this case, you know, well off in the sense that I have more than other people. But, you know, if I had been struck by that disaster, I would be, you know, I would have nobody to call on in that sense. And this leads to all sorts of discussions usually in class about, well, you know, well, what would have happened then? And, you know, and then we start to talk about reality and not just the game. But it starts to get students to think about all of these different situations. You know, the simplifying assumptions of the game make them start to think about, well, that's not what real life is like. And that's the whole point of this cultural anthropology course, is to start to look at especially ways that life may not meet your assumptions of how things work, and especially in societies that are very different, or in communities that are very different from the communities that students, let's face it, here at Penn State may be coming from. And so, you know, that's pretty much the game. That discussion that goes on, in this case, will then go back into another discussion board, which will be really the playing of the game isn't what students are assessed on. I could care less whether or not they're greedy or they are, you know, or they're generous. The point is that it starts to engage them to start to think about these things and to, you know, contextualize some of these ideas. I guess that's the explanation. So questions, I guess.
Have you used it with students yet?
Not yet. We haven't tested this yet with students. The online the hybrid discussion sections are scheduled to start up in the fall semester of this year. So we'll see how it works live then, although in the context of the University Park course. These will actually, we'll use the game for the first time in the context of a class with the World Campus version of Anthropology 45, which is all online. So those students will be the first ones to actually test this out. In terms of, you know, doing it here at University Park, it's going to be in the fall for the first time. So we'll see how well it goes. I know Elizabeth and Adam have been looking at. We'll be tracking some of the assessment of the sort of the pre and post. You know, how well does this game reflect the way it actually works in person in class, to see sort of how well those two things mesh together.
Question on the foreign K through, is this only for Apple's computers? No. But it's not. It's web-based. It's done in Flash. So as long as you have a browser and you can get to the web and you have Flash installed, which is, you know, just about everyone, you should be good to go.
Yeah. There's the magic black box that I don't really know about, which is all the server stuff, which is what Chris and Jason and Zach and are all working on now. But they assure me that this will be relatively easy to deploy. Obviously, it's going to be out there as under a Creative Commons license, so anybody will be able to use it. I should mention one thing, that brief run-through of reciprocity that I gave you. There's going to be a sort of a brief slideshow with me narrating it that will be included with the game itself, so that, you know, if somebody else just wants to take just that, you know, they already have that information there. It will be part of this sort of package as well. It will be about 10 minutes, is what we were planning, 10 minutes or less, with, you know, images to sort of illustrate some of the points that we have been talking about and that were similar to the ones you saw there. But yeah, Jim.
I was curious why you wouldn't put multiple larger distribution of players.
Well, the larger distribution of players, it's a good question. One of the issues with doing this in this manner, we kept keeping the sections apart because these are the way the sections are going to run online. One of the important things, at least for Intro to Cultural Anthropology, is one of the main goals that we have is exposing students to, you know, to thinking about the world in ways that are different from their assumptions, right? And so one of the key aspects of that is, yeah, you have twice a week you have lecture, and some students may ask a question in lecture, but most are too intimidated to do that in front of that. So really the point of these discussion sections is exactly that. We're not just there to rehash, you know, terminology and that was gone over in the book or in lecture, but there to start to get them to engage in these ideas. And so one of the difficulties is, at least from my experience is when you have discussion boards that have, and this is why, I mean, these really work with discussion boards. When you have discussion boards that have, 100 people or so, a lot of students hide and they piggyback off of others.
I guess I didn't think about
Yeah.
it being the same subset as the game.
Exactly. I mean, that's the way it's working here, at least.
I picture this being an online game anyone could go to, and elementary students could play it, or college students could play it, and they would learn from it, and then the discussion could be...
Sure, I think you can do as many people as you want. There's going to be, essentially in the options or the controls for the game. You could do it with, 100 students, 150 students, provided you had the, well, I guess the servers would run still at Penn State or something like that.
Yeah.
So provided that didn't crash the servers, you could run it with more people, certainly. Just in the context of how we're running the game, it's going to be still with that core group of people, mainly, as I said, to preserve that sense of community that sort of is a little bit lost when you have, students only meeting 240, student lectures and never seeing each other face to face. I think one way we're going to mitigate that in that sense is the very first day of class, at least I'm hoping more instructors will do this, is have every student that's a member of a particular section in the lecture hall stand up and meet each other face to face for a few minutes during that very first day, so they at least see each other and then know those are the people that they'll be talking with, and hopefully not engaging in sort of online flame wars on discussion boards and insulting all of them.
Maybe there'd be a way they could put their photos and their student ID up there so that you might recognize each other in class.
In Angel, we can do, obviously you can do that in something like Angel.
They're actually piloting that for Angel.
To make it easier.
Except-
Oh, okay, yeah, because now you have to do like select photo or...
No, let me correct myself. I think only the instructors will be able to see.
Okay, all right. I mean, I know I can now do that in Angel still, like if
But
I
they
go to
can
the roster, I
optionally,
can see, yeah. Which, I mean, and that's fine. I think that's, it's a great idea. The thing is, because they're, these are the sections that are limited 30, 35 students, they'll get a sense of who's who after a while. It may not come right away, but at this point, they'll know each other pretty well, and at least they'll hopefully, the hope is be therefore more engaged with one another in discussions on the discussion boards.
And I have one other,
Mm-hmm.
this is a class they would maybe take in their first year or two, hopefully.
Many of them do.
That connection between, you're always the taker and there's a disaster and you don't end up as well off.
Mm-hmm.
You make the connection with homework in a group setting.
A really good one,
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
slaggers.
Yeah.
for the
Yes,
laggers,
there's always slackers that,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it occurred to me while I was watching this that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Sort of make that point too, and maybe it'll help group work going forward.
I mean, it's one of the things, I would say, at least, definitely in the fall semester, for example, we have, my estimate would be somewhere between 60 to 70% of the students are, this is their first semester, or their freshmen, maybe they start in the summer, but this is, most of them that take this class, this is their first, very first semester. They're all, some of them know what they want to major in, some of them are, still under the liberal arts banner, or, don't really know. And so we have a lot of, first-year students, so really trying to engage them in something that's really important here, because, a lot of them are taking it because it's gen ed, they don't really understand what anthropology is. And so, this is, one of the ways that I think is also, great for being able to get them engaged in some of the material, to sort of, contextualize it in some sense. I know the department head is really jazzed about the idea that we'll also have tons of data that gets generated by this about decision-making in anonymous settings. I mean, there's a lot of behavioral economic research that people are doing about, the way in which anonymous people exchange things with one another, and how they, don't match up with some of those traditional expectations of rational economic behavior. One of the things that is the possible sort of side benefits of this is you have a lot of data about how people are exchanging things, what their ideas are without maybe the background information, and can mine that data for us. She's more...
Rules on the game and then.
Yeah, the rules here are kind of set in this sense. I mean, they're constrained by the programming in some sense, in terms of...
The behavior of the participants.
Oh, sure.
Different if the rules of the game are different.
Yeah, exactly.
So they don't even know there's a disaster possible, they might,
And that's one of the reasons to keep sort of that veiled in some sense, because they don't think about it. Many of us don't either. I mean, it's part of the reason why we had the housing crash. People don't think of the worst case scenario. people think of immediate gratification in some sense. So, you know, this is one of these ways to start to explore all these larger issues too.
When you, I guess when you start them out the game, whether it's the online or the resident game, do you tell the class, try and get as many pennies as you can, or do you sort of let our own capitalist assumptions kind of drive that experience?
I sort of hint at the idea that, you know, having more is a little bit more prestigious. But, you know, it's not that that's the goal of the game. Because one of the key things, actually, I talked to Kathy Small, you know, prior to going through with this process of developing this online game, because it was her concept originally. And one of the things that she, you know, that we really stressed when we were talking was that students don't see that the point of the game isn't to win. You know, there's no point to win in this game. You know, that's not the point. And so, you know, we've tried to sort of stay away from that idea. But part of the thing is to try to get them, you know, thinking about this and see just what happens. You know, and even telling them, you know, well, if you have more, you know, you're a bit more prestigious. You know, some of the students just will still give things away, just because that's, you know, in their nature. I've had that be that explanation of, you know, from when I've asked students, you know, who end up with 1 penny at the end of it. Well, why did you just keep giving things away? Oh, I just thought it was nice. You know, and you know, that's not necessarily a strategy. You know, it's not necessarily something that's conscious. But, you know, even in that sense, what we want to try to do is just get students to act like themselves, right, in this particular case. See what happens when you start to throw in these other sort of actions or these other scenarios that happen. I wonder. I mean, yeah, we call, you know, people don't like to exercise. They like games, right? You know, so if we make it a game, it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more fun. But I mean, certainly, you know, it's, you know, there's all sort of, you know, semantic issues, obviously, with any of this stuff. But, you know, even in this, like I said, you know, not everybody tries to win in that sense. So, but the whole point of it is that, you know, just because I ended up there, I didn't win the game. You know, the point is to see that, well, other people are winning even though they were losing earlier. You know, the fact they can survive in this particular setting, even after they were, you know, victims of this horrible disaster. And then it gets, you know, into all these other discussions of, well, you know, what would happen if you, like I said before, if, you know, you didn't have anything, well, then you could start to talk about, well, then you would, you know, you'd fall back on your family, you know, and your family would take care of you. You know, these are, many times these societies in which reciprocity is so important are often kin-based societies in which you have very strong social obligations to people with whom you are, you know, or part of your kinship. And, you know, you could rely on them, but they might just be as hard hit too, because kin groups tend to also live in closer proximity to one another. So this is one of the ways with establishing, and one of the things we didn't talk about here with the Cooler Ring, for example, and this exchange network off of the coast of Papua New Guinea, where you actually go out and trade things with other people that they may have already, but for the purposes also of establishing connections that you might be able to rely on later. But in which this gift giving also takes place. That's a whole other complicated explanation that we go into in class anyway.
So whenever they first play the game, are they aware that there will be a disaster?
No.
Okay, so I was going to say, because, I mean, that could affect their strategy.
Sure.
And the other question I have is, so when you get into your large lecture classes, is it always like the same number of people will be wiped out, or is it like a percentage of the class, like at their different sizes?
Well, so what I do, I always just do every third person. So, you know, it'll work no matter how many people you have.
Will that translate to the...
What we're going to do here is, it's not going to be as random as it is in class, if only because we want to maintain, you know, the teaching point in that sense. And so there will be a certain percentage of each group. In other words, if you know, the normal distribution, the low end, the high end, and the middle, that will be wiped out, so that at least the teaching point is there. So we sort of set the rules of the game in that sense to make sure that this happens. And I mean, I've never, in my own experience, ever had the case be in class that not a single hoarder is wiped out. Always at least one is wiped out, and this is just completely random. You know, I never make it so that I'm going to make sure that, you know, one of the hoarders is the third person. You know, I just count off from the front of the classroom all the way to the back, you know, or around the circle or whatever, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And it always happens that way. You know, but maybe not. You know, there may not be people who were doing very poorly may not have gotten wiped out, and so therefore don't have a chance to sort of advance in some sense. But we will set the rules of the game so at least the teaching point is maintained in that sense. You know, it's a minor detail, but you know, it ensures that we still get to that point of the discussion.
I have a question related to that. Since this game will be, you said it will be publicly available,
Yep.
right, online. Is there a possibility that future students will know what this game is about?
Perhaps.
Because then they will know what happens in the game.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly, could be the case. I personally don't think people are going to be, oh, no, play this game, thinking, whispering to each other. I mean, that's certainly the case, but I mean, that's the case with exams.
Right.
There's a certain amount that is just out of our control. So it's, I'll be honest, I have high hopes for this game to be widely distributed. I don't think it's going to be something that, is going to be an iPhone app, put it that way. In the sense that people outside who haven't taken the class are going to be familiar with or taken a similar class. I mean, I can see this being used in maybe, a economics course that deals with behavioral economics, for example. Maybe not necessarily sort of macroeconomics in that sense, but, behavioral economics that talks about the way in which people's behavior is, economic behavior is predicated on a whole host of other sort of characteristics or a set of circumstances.
You play the game now and have for several years. Do you have problems of students knowing the outcome?
I've never experienced that. And in fact, actually, when we did one of the things, that first slide that you saw, trade these, get this, that's because we were having difficulties with the current instructor for Anthem 45, allowing us to observe the game in class. So we had to, in order to see how it worked and allow Elizabeth to observe and Adam to see how it worked in person, we actually ran a late night event in which we enticed them by saying, here's free pizza, and if you participate in the game, you get a $15 iTunes gift card. I think there was only one of them that had actually taken an intro cultural course before and had played this game in the course that was taught by another instructor. And so they had played it before, but I actually talked to her a little bit afterwards, and she said, no, I just did, I didn't tell anybody about it. That's not, that ruins the fun of the game in some sense. So hopefully that won't happen, but if it does, I mean, I don't see it ruining the pedagogical purpose for everybody. Maybe a few students will try to game it in that sense. But hopefully there's some of the ones that get screwed too.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I think it helps that you don't tie it to their sort of grade, like winning does not earn you extra points or anything like that. So
you have to participate. I mean, and one of the things with the timing, for example, you have 24 hours to participate in each round. If you didn't get to that, the limit of trades, if there were trades that you hadn't responded to, those will just fall away because since you didn't respond to them, even though somebody offered it to you, since you didn't respond to it in time, that person who offered you that trade will get theirs, back to them. So that's one thing we'll have to see what happens when we actually do this, when we run it for the first time. Will there be, those slacker kids who just don't participate in it enough to do it? But there will be. I would think, my assumption based on it, is that there will be enough people that it will still meet the goal, the instructional goals. But I mean, that's it's always the problem that we have with there's just some men you just can't reach. The cool hand Luke. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the discussion that occurred afterwards, and you do it in class. It's just a class discussion. But when we go to the online thing, you're going to use discussion boards. And you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the way we're going to do it is they're going to be directed to play the game, and then after this final, after the game is over, to go back to a particular discussion board. That's the wrap-up discussion board, and there will be a number of question prompts in the directions for that discussion board that students will be asked to respond to in their posts. And so, right now, having not done it, we'll see how well it works the first time, and obviously it may have to be tweaked depending on how it works this summer in terms of how well does it work in that sense, in the sense that it approximates what actually went on in the classroom. There's a fair amount of instructor requirement in this sense for them to have to make sure that they're on the discussion board, and prompting some of these or responding to some of these ways if students aren't responding in ways that make sense in the context of what they've already learned and what they are learning. So it's not a discussion board where there's just going to be a automatic rubric that if you just post once or, posted twice, that's it. Hopefully, one of the requirements as part of the rubric for, receiving full credit is that, the responses are in depth and that they are, relevant in some sense, put it that way. But you always have that one student in discussion who always, talks about horses when all of us, when you're talking about human behavior. And that's an actual example that I had with students. Talk about horses when talking about, I think it was about kinship, and she started talking about horses, and I had no idea why.
Horses are people too.
Yeah. So, the discussion board, the questions will be, sort of how, what would happen, and probably a bit more prompting than I would do necessarily at the outset of the discussion in class. Because since you're not there and you don't have that immediacy of response, you have to prod them a little bit more at first. So, how did the people fare after the disaster, especially people that didn't do as well compared to those that did as well? What would happen? How does this compare to real life? How does this compare to our own society? And students they don't have to respond to all of them, but they're going to have to respond to at least one or two of them. Is the way the rubric, at least as I've written it now, stands. And we'll see how well it works the first time out. My summer course is going to be my first guinea pigs with this, so we'll see how it flies.
Is it first session or second?
It's first session, yeah.
So you won't have freshmen in there?
No, actually, and it's World Campus too. So I'll have a lot more adult learners, and I mean, I anticipate the discussion section and that being a little bit easier to run, just from my experience with with World Campus students in comparison to, especially when it starts in the fall. We'll see how it works with with a lot of freshmen who aren't quite used to it. But hopefully at this point they'll be used to the flow of these online discussion sections when it comes to this particular game, because from the outset, from the very first week, they'll be participating in discussion boards with one another. Well, they won't do it every week. Some of the weeks will be different types of.
I think just in general, the idea of using educational games, having that debrief is so critical.
Mm-hmm.
And to Eric's credit, I think from the earliest stages of talking about this, he knew what he wanted this game to be, and not to take too much of that sort of debrief time. Like, don't put everything in the game. It's meant to sort of leave kids at a point and just say, okay, from there we're going to take it back into class. I'm going to explain to you why this happened and how this ended up. So that debrief is, I think, one of the most important parts about using a game in any education, having that. So I think we'll be excited to see how it all turns out. World Camp.
I am too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, actually, with the discussion boards, I have more time to think about it.
Yeah.
So you might
I'm hoping that prompts a little, from the, especially for, the students that in class may be, a bit shyer, maybe, a bit more intimidated from, speaking up, in that sense, that anonymity on an online discussion board, even though they know your user ID and your name because it's up there, that anonymity works, in their favor, in some sense.
Public speaking is scarier than death.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, yeah, I could tell you from experience, it's exactly the first time I ever had to teach a class, and I was scared to death. I'm going to look like an idiot in front of these kids, and there's nothing that forces you to make sure you know the stuff more than the fear of looking like an idiot in front of other people. But that's another entire topic.
Do you ever, after you go through the game the first time and, they see the ramifications of, okay, there's a disaster and then what would happen, do you ever then go back and, with them having that knowledge, say, okay, we're gonna do it again and view how their processes change?
That's typically something I really just handle it in the discussion itself.
Okay.
It's, if only because the course itself, when I've done it with I've never done it in a higher level course. I think it could work in terms of, if you had an economic anthropology seminar, which I know we've used it for before. But, that's something that, you kind of know that people are going to, behave differently in that sense. Some of them may still take their chances.
Right, I guess that's what I'd be curious to see,
Yeah.
how many people still actually just say, I'm going to see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to.
But then that gets back to the idea of winning the game again.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly, yeah.
I mean, and that's one of the things, that's what we usually handle that in discussion, and say, and I've had some students say, well, and this actually leads to it led at times to a good discussion about, well, under what circumstances does this work as a system? because this doesn't have to necessarily, now, how do I plan for a disaster? Well, ostensibly, I'm supposed to be saving up money, and I can do that because we have money that allows me to buy anything, which is typically not the situation, or at least money doesn't have, at least in some of these cases, the same role in all of these exchanges that we're looking at here and that we're discussing from a cross-cultural perspective here.
Work very well in a lot of freshmen summer
Mm-hmm.
and giving back.
Work it out to them then too. I mean, I never thought of that. Yeah, I mean, it could. Obviously,
Social capital.
yeah, people would have to. Yeah, exactly.
High school history teachers, I think, could use it too.
I'm hoping that because it's. Like I said, this is what you see here on the screen. This particular scoreboard, in some sense. This is basically all I would have thought of when I first came into this, and so the graphics and all of that display that Zach put into it, I think makes it a lot more enticing, especially than this stuff, which is really the meat of the discussion part of it. You know what I mean? But still, it's no fun to look at that.
And when you start analyzing your data, it might be interesting to have a set of people using this with poker chips instead of beans, something that evokes risk-taking.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we decided with beans just because it evoked, it's still tied back to the same
Yeah.
hypothetical that that the game was originally set up with.
I think Jack and the Beanstalk, actually.
Yeah, it's true. Actually, the first time my wife saw the beans, she thought they looked like jelly beans. I was like, they could be jelly beans, especially with the bucket, now it's being around Easter time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm pretty sure if I had to, I could survive on jelly beans. Especially those just born jelly beans. Every time I go to the store now, it's horrible because it's Easter time and now jelly beans everywhere.
Little bunnies pooping with
Yeah.
But we have time for one or two more questions. Is there, especially anyone on the far end, if you have a question, you can type it in the chat or you can activate your voice and just ask away.
Well, thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think
We got one.
maybe
We got a live one.
I saw it come in with it for a second.
I guess we should talk about that YouTube
Oh yeah.
video real quick.
I don't know if it'll play, but if any of you want to look at it, and if you could send it out to people who registered for the seminar if you want. That YouTube link is actually Brett brought this to my attention. It's from an episode of The Big Bang Theory, and it's Sheldon. I've never watched the show, so I wasn't even aware of this. But one of the characters, the female lead in the show, what's her name? Penny. Okay. How appropriate, the Penny game, yeah. But Penny apparently comes over, around Christmas time and says she wants to give Sheldon a gift, and one of his immediate reactions is, you think you've given me a gift, but you've given me an obligation, and then all the things that he goes through in trying to find what's going to be the perfect gift for her, and then when he discovers that the gift is a bar napkin signed by Leonard Nimoy, that he realizes there's no way he could ever repay that with any gift. So, it illustrates some of the gift giving aspects of this, which actually works rather nicely. I'm looking forward to using this and actually using the clip. Hopefully, CBS will leave it up there.
Can you find a way?
I've already
people to download it.
Oh, I already downloaded it. I think we could, because it's smaller than.
And we think under fair use, I think we're okay, but.
I could embed it also. Yeah.
The other one I'm thinking about that I think maybe the older generation will get is. The ending scene from It's a Wonderful Life. After George loses all the money and all the people in town come and they give back to him, and so they basically save his skin from the.
Older people watch Big Bang.
I think anyone who watches Star Trek has seen an episode.
I know. Oh man. Yeah, I've got a small child. I've got a baby and trying to find a permanent job. So I don't have time for TV right now, unfortunately.
Sometimes you just need to relax by laughing a lot, and that's a perfect show.
It is the best medicine.
Yeah.
But we'd be be happy to send out, I guess, a link to the single player.
Yeah, it's
version of the
also
game,
in,
too.
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I'll put it in the
Okay.
chat room, well, actually, I guess,
Yeah, and feel free to, to use it, and, I think, do we have the help, all the help information isn't quite embedded in that game, version of the game, right?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Are you gonna take your game on the road to, teaching situations?
Well, I'm allowed to.
Conventions and stuff?
I'm allowed to. I mean, if it had been ready this year, we probably would have done something at the teaching and learning with technology. And I mean, I'll put in a proposal next year for the TLT since it'll be ready then. Given wherever I am, I'll come back and talk about it with everybody else that was involved. I mean, I was looking at other games that are of interest. There are a whole host of, economics is, there's a lot that you can do with different types of games that people can play. There's ultimatum games where people are given a sum of money that they're told that they're supposed to split, and then, you measure how generous people are, and, because they could give nothing if they wanted, but, no, I think I can talk forever, so I'll stop here since it's 1 o'clock now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks everybody out there in Adobe Connect land for
was there
being here.
a sign-up sheet down there? Oh, thank you.